Who were the Hebrews? The first person mentioned in the scripture as a Hebrew is Abraham. We can see this in Genesis 14, verse 13. One of the survivors came and told Abram, his name was Abram, the Hebrew, one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew. Now he lived by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and these were allies of Abram. And again, modern Hebrew changed the B, the Bayit, to a V, a Vav, has no meaning. So Abram, there would be a B here, and that's why, I can show it to you in the NIV, for example. It's just Abram. But what we want to look at is we want to look at Abram. And then under that would be what? The Hebrew. And that phrase in the Father's original language is Ibri. Not Ivri, but Ibri. Don't take the Bayit, the family, out of the Father's word. Ibri. Okay? So Ibri. So when we look at Ibri, there's a couple things that stick out to us. Number one, Genesis 14:13, we see for the first time in the Father's word where Hebrew is mentioned as Abraham as the Hebrew. And we can see that the Hebrew word for Ibri is Ibri in English, or we would say Ayin, the eyeball, Bayit, the house, Resh, the thoughts, and then Yod, the arm, and the hand, the action. So what's important here is that we can look at the word Hebrew. And not only do we know the word Hebrew, but we can look at the root word Iber. So, or Ibir. So we get the root word of where it comes from. And all Hebrew words have a root word or root letters that make up that word. There's patterns that you have to follow in Hebrew that make it a Hebrew word. I'll talk to you more about that in a minute. So we can see that the Hebrew root word for Hebrew is Abar, Iber, Abir. But what we want to look at is effectively what these words mean. So if we look at Hebrew, let's see if we can derive what these words mean. So Hebrew, one from beyond. A designation of the patriarchs of the Israelites. A patriarch, an Eberite, or Hebrew, or descendant of Abir, however we say it. And then we can look at the root word, the actual root word, Iber. And then we can go, okay, beyond, straight, passage. Again, they're just dropping in words that are used in the scripture. The region beyond or across, side, region across or beyond, side, opposite side. A region across, but used only adverbially. Okay. Maybe as a preposition, the opposite side. Something like, especially like the Jordan, crossing over the Jordan, usually meaning the east, against, beyond, by form. So we have a couple different meanings. If we look at the Hebrew lexicon, we can see region on the other side, situated across a stream or the sea. The one I want to call your attention to is on the other side. The word Ibri means to cross over. It's just simply, we can get this from the Abar, the Abir or Abar So that root word means to cross over. So what you could say is a Hebrew specifically, and again, we're talking about the Hebrews. A Hebrew is one who has crossed over in covenant relationship, beginning with Adam. So we know Abram's ancestor was Eber in the scripture, and he was most likely a Hebrew as well. So why do we say that the Hebrew is one who has crossed over in a covenant relationship beginning with Adam? That's because the scripture is the story of Elohim, the story of Yahweh and Yeshua and acts through the Ruach, the Ruach HaKodesh, the presence and the power of Yahweh and Elohim. And it's the story of his covenant relationship. And the way you want to think of it, again, taking away a Western mindset and trying to capture an Eastern mindset, Hebraically, or in a Hebrew thought pattern, you would understand this as crossing over from death to high, to life. So crossing over from death to eternal existence with the Father, his Son, okay? With an ancestral line beginning with Adam, through his descendants. Now pay attention, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's descendants, who became who? They became the nation of Israel, known as the Hebrews. Now, real quickly, their descendants, Noah and his 3 sons, Abraham, Isaac, Yitzhak. Very, very importantly, when we talk about covenant, we have to talk about Jacob, Yaakov, okay, and Yaakov's descendants, who the Father, you could say, recovenanted or just reestablished or just refreshed the covenant, the original covenant with Jacob and his descendants. And basically, that's because it passed from Abraham. Okay? And this is also one of the reasons we'll talk about it in tithing, but the Father covenanted with Jacob and his descendants, who became the Levites, and he covenanted with them. They didn't get land when they went into Canaan. The Israelites had to carve out their land so that they could grow food for who? Jacob and his descendants, the Levites. So it's very, very important to understand this history. So when we look at the origin of the Hebrew language, okay, and again, we're spending a lot of time laying a foundation to go back to the beginning. So let's look at the origin of the Hebrew language and the alphabet, the Aleph Bayit. So I know everyone's going to challenge me that Aramaic's older than Hebrew, and I know that's what you've been taught. So let's find out if that's true. So what is the origin of the Aleph Bayit, the alphabet? Pre-flood writings have been discovered in the city of Kish. These are the oldest known to mankind. Okay? And what I'll do is I'll probably put some really cool music behind it, because that's what everyone does whenever they start to talk about the language on the YouTube videos. Trying to get you all pumped up and hyped up to drop a lie into your brain. Listen. Pre-flood writings were discovered in the city of Kish. The oldest known to mankind. Several of the letters in this tablet are identical to the original Hebrew letters. Okay? And we can see the foot, we can see the resh, the head, we can see the lamed, the staff, we can see the kof, the open hand. We can see symbols that resemble the original picture forms that I've shared with you through the Father's Word. We can see it on these tablets, these old tablets. Where do we get the word pictograph? Because pictograph is not the Father's Word. It is a Greek word meaning picture writings. And what that means is there's a pitcher which represents a sound or combination of sounds. Okay? So bear with me while I go through this, because you need to understand this to fully grasp what is being taught. How can we trust Hebrew is origin, the origin? Because Genesis chapter 5 gives us a genealogical record from Adam to Noah, where we find every name, all the names are Hebrew in Genesis chapter 5. On the surface, that means nothing. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that Elohim created man, he made him in Elohim's likeness. Created him male and female, okay? Adam, okay? Enoch. Enoch begets sons and daughters, all the days, right? And so it goes through the line of the lineage of Adam, okay? And then you can also, of course, trace that back through Shem's line for Yeshua. And that's really important to understand. It's not, well, I'll break it down for you. So, on the surface, this list to a believer, unless they dig deeper, may not fully understand what we're showing you or how significant this list is. The descendants of Adam, what we call the where the names are all recorded. So we know these names are Hebrew, and how do we know that? We know these names are Hebrew and not another language for two reasons. Okay. And remember, I said Hebrew follows a set pattern. It has root words. It has a way that it is built like a tree with branches and roots. And I will try to at some point show that to you guys. But number one, this is how we qualify Hebrew. Number one, all the names have meaning only in Hebrew. Okay? Number two, all the names are related to the character as described in the scriptural text. What do we mean by that? An example of this is the Hebrew name Adam means man. But we know Adam or Adam was the first man. That's the character. That's the character piece. Okay? So not only is his name originally Hebrew, his character matches his Hebrew original name. Let's take another one. Methuselah. Methuselah who? Methuselah. Methuselah means, his name means, his death brings. Why is this important? Because the flood came in the year that Methuselah died. His death brings the flood. Okay? The Father's hand is all over this. The Father's hand is all over this. The Ruach HaKodesh orchestrated the Father's word in Hebrew. It is the Father's language. Noah means comfort. How does this align to his character? In Genesis 5:29, it says that he will bring comfort to his people. Why? Because his name was Noah, and this same will comfort us in our work and in the toil of our hands, because of the ground which Yahweh has cursed. Okay, and I can't wait to share with you how bad the land was cursed. Believers have no idea how bad the land was cursed. They've never read the Apocrypha, and they have no clue how severe this was. That's why Noah was named Comfort. Noah was named Comfort. Rest. So we want to go through these step by step and build upon each of these. Adam, man, Methuselah, his death brings, Noah, comfort. Why is this important? It's really simple. Noah had 3 sons. And what I'm going to show you now is that Noah, with his 3 sons, something happens. A transformation happens that basically the names change, and therefore the character or the meaning of the names become unknown. And I'm going to show you in the scripture where this is, so you're not accusing me of making this up. Everything I show you will be in the scripture. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So how did we get in this mess? Okay? With all these messed up languages, no one following the Hebrew way. Noah had 3 sons. It is extremely important that you understand this and that you can teach this to people. In their lives, Elohim brought the great flood. And after they are instructed, they being mankind, Adam and Hawa, Genesis 9:1, it's interesting. We see that the Father says, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and what? Fill the earth." Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. Okay. Elohim blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." Same thing before that to his ancestors. The point is this. At this point, the flood has occurred. Okay, and they are basically in Mesopotamia, in Babylon, and that's where they begin to build the towers. Well, what we can see from the scripture and the history is that they were all centered around Mesopotamia. But yet the Father told them in Genesis 9:1, "Be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth." That's his direct command, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that the Father caused this, but it does seem that it would align to the history and what we see in the scripture. So we could ask the question, did Elohim cause the Tower of Babel to increase man in number and what? Fill the earth? So did he cause the Tower of Babel to disperse men to the 4 corners of the earth? I'll leave that for you to decide. I'm not taking a stance either way in the word. I just think it's interesting the way this all plays out. And so this is how it played out. Shortly after the flood, we have the Tower of Babel, and we have the dividing of languages, but not Hebrew. And I'll show you why. After the Tower of Babel, we find 3 major languages, each very different on the earth. Hebrew, the original letter form writing and pictures, number 1. Number 2, Sumerian. Sumerian. You have Sumerian pictographs that evolved into what is called Hebrew cuneiform, and I'll explain this in a minute through pictures. But you have the Sumerians whose their pictographs, like the Egyptians, evolved into cuneiform, and they also were the first to imprint on clay tablets, and then that created the wedge-shaped writings familiar to most when they look at cuneiform. And then we have, finally, number 3, the Egyptian. 3 major languages, Hebrew, Sumerian, and Egyptian. History shows that the arrival of the Egyptian and Sumerian languages mysteriously seem to have appeared from out of nowhere. And while the pictures are very similar, the sounds for each letter are all different. Now we learn in the Apocrypha that the Father gives Shem, Ham, and Japheth dominion of the earth. Okay? And again, the Apocrypha is the Father's word. It's just, it was taken out. So Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In Genesis chapter 10, we see the table of the nations record. So we see another record of genealogy. And it says, this is the history of the generations of the sons of Noah, and of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. And it goes into that history. So we have the table of nations as a record. As a result of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of the languages, man began to migrate in 3 different directions from Mesopotamia. You could say, maybe as Elohim planned, be fruitful, multiply, go fill the earth. So, number 1, the Shemites, also known as the Semites. They are the descendants of Shem, and they traveled west. They spoke Hebrew. Okay? Hebrew wasn't lost. They spoke Hebrew. This is where we get cultures that we see in the scripture, such as the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, the Akkadians, the Moabites, Ammonites, and the Arameans. All came out of the Hebrews. Part of the, what we call the Shemitic or Semitic family is the way you've probably heard it. Number 2, we have the Japhethites. They traveled north, and these are the descendants of Japheth. Okay, remember Noah's second son. Okay. They traveled north. The Japhethites became the Sumerians. Likely they are a subgroup of the Scythians speaking Sumerian. And I'll explain what this all means in a second as we give you pictures. The land of the Sumerians was known as Sumer, which is Shinar in the scripture. You know it as Babylon. So Sumer, Shinar, it's Babylon or Babylonian, or Babylonia, sorry. Okay, and then third we have the Hamites from the son of Ham. Noah had a son Ham. Hamites, also known as the Egyptians. They traveled south into Africa, and they became the Egyptians speaking Egyptian. And they also have their own language, which was the hieroglyphs, similar to the Sumerians. We're going to show you that. Why is this important? Because we learn in scripture that it's not until we come to Noah's grandchildren and begin to see other names that are not of Hebrew origin. For example, we can look at Genesis 10 verse 8, and we see the word or the name Nimrod. Name of the name Nimrod. So let's look at that, Genesis 10 verse 8. Genesis 10 verse 8 says, Cush became the father of Nimrod. Nimrod. Cush, Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one, lowercase Elohim, in the earth. Now Cush, let's look at Cush's name. His father, Cush, another pagan leader. What does it say? Root word. Remember, we're looking for that root word to tie back to the original Hebrew. It says probably of foreign origin. Okay? Cush, meaning black. Okay? Cush, probably of foreign origin. Cush, or Ethiopia, the name of a son of Ham. Who did we say Ham was? Ham was the Egyptians. Okay, the Egyptians were the descendants of Ham. How do we know this? Well, let's keep looking, let's keep digging, but let's look at Nimrod. So I showed you one name that is not of Hebrew descent. Here's another one, Nimrod. Cush became the father of Nimrod. Nimrod, right here, Nimrod. Yes, they're using Hebrew letters to describe it, but when you look at its origin, probably of foreign origin. This is from the Strongs, teaching you that, hey, there's no root word for this. There are different spellings for it. Okay? But there's really no root word for this. We know Nimrod, rebellion, or the mighty one, lowercase Elohim, the son of Cush, grandson of Ham, great-grandson of Noah. We know Nimrod introduced some serious sun worship in Babylon. Tammuz, where we get Christmas from, and the worship of Jesus on Christmas. But this is our first clue. This should be our first clue. Nimrod, his name, probably of foreign origin. It doesn't have a Hebrew origin. Founder of the kingdom of Babylon. It doesn't have a Hebrew origin. We can look at some other ones, we can look at one above that, Genesis 10:7. Here's another name. The sons of Cush were, and then he named his sons. Savta was one of them, so we can look at that name, for example, and we can see that he continued the distortion. Sabta, Hebrews 54:54, probably a foreign derivation. Striking, but we don't know, right? Because it's not a Hebrew word. We're just taking the word for it for how it formed over time. The construction of Hebrew words, including names, follows a set pattern, is what I'm trying to teach you. Words like Nimrod, or the name I just shared with you, Sevtika or Savtika, sounds Russian, Stabta, they are not of Hebrew origin. So words that don't follow these patterns are suspect of being of foreign origin. Where can we also apply this? Words like Yahweh, where they change Yod He Wah to Yod He Vav He, and they change the father's name, or Yahuwah, and you only get Yod He, I guess a breath or an ayin in the middle of it, and then another He. Again, the father's name is Yod He Wah He, no matter how you say it. It is the Tetragrammaton, the 4 letters. No one would argue that. Yet there are others that would try to teach you a distortion of it. This is where it comes from. Okay? Ancient Semitic languages are very clearly defined. When we say Semitic, you should always think Shemitic. Okay, so here's an ancient Shemitic or Semitic Hebrew pictograph from a stone boulder from circa 1500 BCE. We know that the Hebrew is formed from 22 letters. That's really important. Numbers are extremely important to the Father. The Father's number is not 7. I don't know where they get that. But these numbers are very important to the Father. 22, okay? I just want you to know the number. I don't want you to get hung up on what the numbers mean right now. But what I want you to notice is that you can see Mem, the water. You can see the the mark, Tau. You can see the shepherd's staff. You can see the mouth. You see, this is from a stone boulder, engraved on a stone boulder that they found in 1500. Now, watch what happens. I'm going to take you through the eras. I'm going to take you through each one of those lines, those bloodlines, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. I'm going to show you exactly what happened to the Father's word. Okay? Then we go forward. We fast forward to 900 BCE, just a few hundred years forward, okay? And then we see, just a few hundred years later, a Hebrew inscription on pottery. And what do you notice? It went from the pictures to a script, where it was kind of jumbled together, still being written right to left, but it was turned on its side to fit more as a script, right? So we see the evolution to a script, and that's normal. And then in the ancient Semitic language from Shem, in the original Hebrew, we see distortions begin. So here we're showing the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, the Akkadians, and the Moabites. And here we're showing you a Moabite inscription on stone around 900 BCE. And yes, you can still see Mem. I think that next letter would be Aleph, because it looks a lot like the Aleph in the modern Hebrew. You have the Tau, I'm not sure what the next letter is, maybe the Yod, either the foot or the shepherd's staff. And then it looks like a tent peg, but it has a hook in it. And then below that, you're going to see the Ammonites. The Ammonites, okay, around that same time. And you can see it's starting to get a little distorted, a little more distortive on the end there, where it looks like an A for anarchy. It's actually an olive. That's actually the ox head, the olive. And then we can go to what we start to see is the splintering of the Hebrew in subgroups. So we begin to see the Hebrew splinter off at this point. And so now we'll show you that the Arameans, and this is where we get the Aramaic text. So of everything I'm telling you, this is the most important to pay attention to. I'm showing you here that there's an Aramaic inscription on stone around that same time, 500 BC, okay? So we go from 900 BC, a few hundred years forward to 500 BC, and we see Aramaic inscription, okay? And we can see it somewhat resembles the Hebrew, but clearly there's an influence of something else here. And actually, if you look at it, it starts to look like modern Hebrew, especially with the Bayit at the end. Now, if you look below that, you're going to see the Ugaritic text. And this is where we start to get the wedge-shaped forms, where we see that the Hebrew cuneiform script was being basically imprinted into clay tablets, and that's what created the Ugaritic script. But what I'll draw your attention to is the Ugaritic script has 30 letters. And if you'll notice, the Father's word is completely, the symbols are gone at that point for that language. So let's continue. The Aramaic or the Aramean script was used exclusively where? In the Babylonian region. And here we see that it once resembled the original Hebrew. So the first picture is around 1000 BCE. So we can see, some of the original Hebrew in this Aramaic inscription on a stone incense altar around 500 BCE. But if we look at the one below it, we can see that it has evolved. And this is Aramaic. This is not Hebrew. Okay? What I'm showing you, Aramaic came after Hebrew. Aramaic evolved into something independently from the Semitic or the Shemitic groups by 400 BCE. Now, in this form, I'm showing you 20 CE. So many hundred years of after that, but you can see historians will show you that around 400 BC, that basically the original Hebrew is not recognizable. It does not resemble the original pictograph script any longer. And so, when you're looking at this, had I not given you clues, if you could recognize the modern Hebrew, you would recognize the modern Hebrew looks like the Aramaic. And I hope you're catching on to the deception about Hebrew that's floating around. Do you think that the modern Jew Jewish rabbi, Pharisees, want you to know the Hebrew letter forms of the Father. If you look, the modern Hebrew, almost identical to Aramaic. Where have you seen these symbols before? Modern Hebrew. So what happened to the Hebrew? When the Hebrew people are taken into Babylonian captivity, they adopted the Aramaic script. They abandoned the ancient Hebrew script and language. Again, the Father warned them, when you go into the land, tear down those altars, tear down those high places, tear down those idols of worship. He knew this was going to happen. He knew it was going to happen. It's from this point to the present, the Hebrew language has been written in the Aramaic script. This is figure 10 here, is the Hebrew writings from the Dead Sea Scrolls, around 200 BCE. And I will ask you again, as I have asked you many times, who and in what have you believed? I think the Father says it best, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. I'm showing you unequivocal proof that your language has been hijacked. Your belief system has been hijacked. If you are a Jew, your belief system has been hijacked. Your language has been hijacked. If you're a believer just learning this, you need to understand that modern Hebrew is Aramaic. It is not modern. It is not ancient Hebrew. It's not Paleo Hebrew. It is not anything resembling Hebrew. So was the Hebrew lost? Was the Hebrew lost? And the answer is no. Because although the modern Hebrew, the Aramaic script, has changed the visible symbol forms, the meaning of the letters for the most part, have not been changed. The meaning of the letters, for the most part, has not been changed. This means the majority of Hebrew text of the 1st century BCE and into Common Era are in what? They're in Aramaic. The ancient Hebrew script was not lost, and it was still used on occasion. So here's some examples of this. The coins of this era used the Hebrew pictures. We can see that the coins use the Hebrew pictures in certain cases. And we can see the Dead Sea Scrolls, the pictographic Hebrew writings from the Dead Sea Scrolls. You know, we can see in this picture we can definitely see the two front teeth, the sheen. We see the hay, the spirit man. We see the gimel, the foot or the staff. We see the plowing instrument, zayin, and the wah as well. So we see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it wasn't lost. And in addition to that, we know Samaria, S-A-M-A-R-I-A, Samaria, not Sumeria, S-U. Don't confuse the two. Don't confuse Samaria with the Sumerians. I know it's confusing, but don't do that. Samaria, or as you know them, the Samaritans, okay? The Samaritans lived in the land of Samaria in Israel at the time of Israel's captivity. But unlike the rest of Israel, they were not taken into Babylon with Israel. What does that mean? Because of their isolation and not being taken into captivity, they are the only culture that retains a script that is similar to the ancient Hebrew script, and it's still used to this day. Okay? And you can see that on the figure 13 on the Samaritan script. So you can see some similarities in the Samaritan script to the original Hebrew letter picture forms that I shared with you. So many believers don't understand or know that as we continue in the progression, okay, in the history of language, the Greeks and the Romans adopted the Hebrew language. So the Greeks specifically adopted the Hebrew language, and the Romans adopted the Greeks, which adopted the Hebrew languages, right? So around 1000 BCE, the Greeks adopted the ancient Hebrew script, and it's evolved over centuries to become the Greek alphabet, or the script that's used today. This is where the script was changed from right to left to be written left to right. And that was a decision around 500 BCE. The Greeks finalized, hey, we're going to write from right to left. And then the Semites, the Shemites, to this day, they didn't adopt that. They write from right to left instead of left to right. So when we look at ancient inscriptions that were written on stone, what we understand, the reason that they wrote right to left, and I'm showing that here. I'm showing that here, where you can see in the top portion of the letters in figure 14, you can see the Greek inscription is written from right to left. So at one time they did adopt and write from right to left. And what you'll notice is that the letters themselves are actually facing to the left, whereas in English they would face to the right. And so on the bottom you can see later Greek, it actually adopted to go left to right, and it writes and it shows that direction. Now you can see the letters, the K and the E, on the top are pointing left, but on the bottom one, the K and the E are pointing right. So the reason for this is pretty simple. Ancient inscriptions were written on stone, and a hammer was held in the right hand, and a chisel on the left. And so it was natural to write right to left, because you're pushing to the right with the hammer. So when paper and ink began to be used, they would write left to right, and the reason for that was so the ink would not get smeared. So if you're dragging your hand writing from left to right, you have no chance of smearing the ink. If you were to try to do it from right to left, you would have a good chance of smearing the ink with your palm of your hand. So what about the Egyptians? We understand the Greeks, so we know that they adopted the Hebrew language, but then they changed it. They changed it to be their own. I mean, that's easy to see. What about the Egyptians? So in addition to the Hebrew alphabet that's in use, the Egyptians used a very complex system of hieroglyphs. Each pictograph represents 1, 2, or 3 symbols. So here I show you figure 16, Egyptian hieroglyphs from the Book of the Dead, around 1350 BCE. You can see these today on most any carvings in Egypt. Similar, but here's what you may not know, is similarly, the Sumerians had a similar style of the Egyptians with several hundred pictographs. These over time became what we know as cuneiform or Hebrew cuneiform, a script like the Ugaritic. And you can just see that figure 17 shows the Sumerian pictograph on clay tablet, and then the same thing, figure 18, around 3000 BC, figure 18 is shown at around 2500 BC. So if we look at how ultimately, though, the Hebrew influenced the English, here we can see it pretty easy in the symbol of the lamed, or the shepherd staff, where we would get the lamed, we would equate it to an L in English. What I want to show you is that there were definitely similarities of script for each culture that could have been observed. So for the lamed, you can see it's still a shepherd staff, ancient Semitic, right? That's the original view. The Moabites turned it upside down. Now it looks like a foot, like Gimel. The Aramaic did the same thing, and it really looks like a foot. The Samaritans still kept the hook, the crook in there, like a traditional staff, but it's upside down. And then we have various forms of Hebrew. Then we have the Ammonites, again upside down with the crook in it. The Hebrew Aramaic that looks like a lightning bolt, and then we have the Greek, which basically looks like a backward L, and then the modern Hebrew. I don't know how you could get a shepherd's staff out of the modern Hebrew, but you can see it there. But that's what influenced the letter L in English. So I know this went long, but this was an extremely important lesson to understand that the Hebrew is the Father's original language, but it also that the Aramaic is not. And to say that the Aramaic is older than the original Hebrew is not true. And I just showed you in the Father's Word why that is. So what we need to understand again is that the Hebrews, and when I say Hebrews, I mean very, very specifically Abram and the Hebrews, who you are in covenant with, or claim to be, or believe to be in covenant with, believed unto righteousness, the same as Shaul taught us to believe in Yeshua unto righteousness for salvation. Okay? It's that belief system that is extremely important to understand, that Yeshua came and fulfilled the sacrificial parts of the law. The other parts of the loving instruction of the Father have not been fulfilled. They were actually given before the law. You say, well, how is that possible, Robert? Well, Cain and Abel, Cain was told not to basically kill his brother. That's civil law. But that was before the law. That's just at the beginning where the Father's teaching Cain and Abel how to live together. And they ultimately get into a fight because Abel, sheep, cross into Cain's fields where he was growing things, and that started the conflict. And then you have Cain slaying Abel. Some believe he slit his throat, whatever. But that's civil law. That's before the law is given. The moral law, it's how we communicate with the Father and our accountability to Him. That's before the law. I already read that to you, in Genesis many, many times. If you will obey, if you will obey, if you will guard, if you will obey, if you will guard, you get the picture? So when we pick up in the next segment, we're really going to dive back into the definition of wickedness, and we're going to build upon this understanding of the languages, because it's very hard to understand, when I say Yahweh and why I say Yahweh, or Yeshua, and why I'm so sure that these are the names of the Father and the Son, and how to pronounce them, because we're looking at Scripture because it teaches us how to do these things. So I look forward to being with you again in the next session. Thank you.